All right, let's get going. It's 18 minutes after 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern Daylight Saving Time. Today is the 16th of June, 2019. Welcome, I'm Agamemnon the First, and this is Chronicles of Earth 9. This is our fan fiction show. This is the Writer's Workshop. It's a lot of titles, but they have their purpose, or reason. You should always categorize things according to Aristotle. He always claimed you should categorize things in their proper place. This is a different show than what we do with our streaming. With our streaming show, The Grind, we pretty much play games, and hopefully it's interactive. As our audience grows, it'll be more interactive, hopefully. But this show actually is intended to be more interactive because writing is a creative endeavor, and it's always best, although a lot of times I write in solitude, but it is better to write in a collaborative way and work with other people when you're writing, because other people can point out things in a story that you may not realize when you're reading it. Not necessarily flaws in the story, but they can see it from a different point of view. And especially our stories are very character driven. They're really heavy on what the characters do in the story, not necessarily where they're at in the story. And so when you have so many different characters, perspective, having their different person point things out to you, it's a lot of times a good thing. Especially you have the book reviewed by people who are older, younger, called newer, getting ready to expire type people. You know, it's it'd be a good thing. OBS Studio can't make up his mind. Are we on 1, 2, or 0 viewers? It should be 1 viewer. Yeah. Anyway, so let's get started. We were doing the review for Road to Redemption. We're going to continue that. Go ahead and do a new pad here. There's actually quite a bit of stuff that we need to do going on in the 2 novels that we're doing. I've come up with some new ideas for book 3. I want to go ahead and get book 4, chapter 1 put up before I do any of that, and we still need to finish the review for book 2, the formal review of it, which is good. I'm hoping by writing every day, or at least working on each project every day. When you work on a project, it's not necessarily you're writing every single day, but some days you're writing, some day you're researching, some days you're doing the logistical part of the creation, which is taking the idea from Notepad or Notesy and then putting in Word to process the forms into their proper page size. And then from their proper page size, then you got to put it in Publisher to make the plates. You got to put it in the scripting software to get the voices correct, or in their proper voices. And then from there, you have to take each of those, put it all together into a video clip. And then from the video clip, you need to put those all have to be assembled in a way that the times are correct, so that when you do the 3D animation, they're all seamless. And then the limitations of the 3D animation is, at least when I used iClone, you had to do everything in 5-minute clips. I imagine the newer one isn't that much different. I imagine the newer ones might be a little faster in some respect. I have better processing speed, but that has more to do with the computer than the software itself. But I don't think it would have varied that much. Even you think in most softwares, I mean, tools vary, but they don't. The basic concept of the software doesn't really change all that much over time. I mean, Word still works the same way that it did from version 3 onward. first two versions of Word weren't that good. They were actually on the Mac. First Word started on the Mac, and then as Microsoft started putting Word or Windows out on the PC, I guess they released it as a Windows 3. Yes. Well, it makes sense because at the time, before it became Windows, it was what was it called? If I remember correctly, it was what do you call it? Something DOS. DOS shell is what it was. It was DOS shell, and then from DOS shell it became Windows, and then it was Windows 3.0 was their first real success with it, and then it had two upgrades, which was eventually 3.11, and then I think 3.11 is the best. From a user point of view, I feel 3.11 was the best version of all Windows that I've used. And then they went to the Windows 95 format, which was visually how they wanted to look. And at that point, PCs were pretty much a 16-bit environment going to a 32-bit environment. Problem that the PC had is originally was an 8-bit environment, 8-bit system that went to a 16-bit system and then a 32-bit system. And it took it like from 1980 all the way to about 1995 to make that transition. And even then it wasn't a pure transition because you had the from 1990 to 95 you had anywhere from a 386SX, 386DX, 486 and SX and DS. The difference between the SX and DX was the bus that the processor sat on was either 16 or 32-bit bus, right? So the SX was a 16-bit bus. So even if you had a decent processor, the processor can only operate at whatever the bus can operate at. So but by that time, 95, Apple was into PowerPC era, right? So they were already moving into the 64-bit. The Macintosh was already a 32-bit system right out the gates in 84, 85. So they had a 10-year head start on the PC, which is quite a bit of a leap. And I don't think the PC really caught up to the Mac until year 2000 in terms of performance. I don't think it really, even with NT, Windows NT was their 16-bit operating system, or attempt to make a 32-bit operating system. And Windows 2000 was kind of their milestone moment. I think that the Windows NT, Windows 2000 route, my experience was the best experience because you didn't have all this crazy stuff going on, and it seemed to work better. I think NT and Windows 2000 I felt worked better overall. I didn't have a whole lot of problems with Windows, so I used Windows 95 and Windows 98. There was a 98B. Had a huge problem. Well, I think what happened is when Windows 95 came out, it was a competing product which was called Doublespace. And Microsoft had their version of DriveSpace, which basically was a ripoff of that software. And I guess they got sued. So they had to make an upgrade to that. And something like that. Anyway, then there was the browser war, Netscape Navigator, and Windows Explorer, Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer was essentially a ripoff of Netscape Navigator. And then I think Google came along and kind of blew all those browsers out of the water, huh? Google Chrome. Anyway, that's kind of a tangent. Look at my notebook here. Got a lot of notes. But need to look at the notes to see what time we're at. 3 hours and 25 minutes. So where we're at. Got this little flyaway dangling in my eye. It hurt. It's annoying. Anyway, here we go. Feels weird now. Get my headset on correct. So there we go. Let's see. Bring up the book. Make this bigger. Road to Redemption. It should be right where we left off. I haven't advanced this, so it should be right.
To never be afraid of your own skin. The outfit shows confidence.
Okay, from the remaining portion of this book, aren't any really major intercourse scenes. There's 2 coming up, but as we get to them, I'll decide to mute them out or not. If turns out some of the material in the book might not be TOS approved. I don't know if it is or isn't, but why take the chance? It's during the day, and we'll mute those out if necessary, but on YouTube they're not muted out, so if people want to see them, hear them in their entirety, then no big deal. I feel that when the computer reads a lot of the sexual stuff, it reads it too fast. Whenever you're reading about romance and sexual intercourse, it has to be read at a certain, I think, tempo. And that's because I study music. I play guitar and I play percussion. Guitar is a percussion instrument. But I feel when we wrote the first 2 books, I was still writing, the way I was doing the intercourse scenes, I was still writing it from an anatomical sort of vision. But then when we started working on book 3, I wrote chapter 1 of book 4 before I wrote book 3, and that book has now become book 5. Because as I started writing book 3, I realized we had just too much material, and so we had to then split. We had to put another book between what would have been book 3 and book 4. So since book 4 is really just they're going back in time and explaining how she became Wonder Woman, what was the whole reasoning in that, in the 9th universe. So but I wrote that one first, and the reason why I wrote it first was in the opening chapter she loses her virginity at the age of 25, which was significant for the goddess, and the way a hedonist would do it would be significantly different. And we needed to show in that book why book 4, which is now book 5, is important. Is because we finally in the series get to see what the immortal society looks like. Up until that book, we've seen everything from the immortal side, and the way I had wrote the serial, or my intent of the serial, was book 1 would just pretty much introduce the 3 main characters and introduce you to the world of 1943, which was where the United States was at war with the Axis power, Germany and Japan and Italy. And so that's where we were at. And so book 2 was just sort of an extension of that, just a larger version of that, because we only had 3 months to write the first book, and then the second book we had 11 months to write the story, so pushing a deadline. And so that turned out to be good, because it was 73,000 word book. But then between book 2 and book 3, I kind of realized how the novels needed to be. They were going to be online in a video book, then they had to be structured in a way that would be one, promotable, and marketable to the average everyday person. And so that's when I settled on the idea of the 144,000 word novel, which I feel 144,000 words is not a fairly large book. There are larger books than that. Definitely, I think Dracula is like, what, 170,000 words. So it's only in 18 chapters. But I figured 12 was a good number. 144,000 seemed like a good, strong word. And all our chapters are written within 12,000 words, which I think makes for a strong chapter. It's a not too large for a person that it bores them, but at the same time, it gives you enough space to write a good in-depth story. Which I feel 12,000 is a good, strong number to shoot for. And then, so 144,000 words is actually pretty good. I think good size book to tell a lot of story. One of the things that I feel that an adult comic book would be versus one written for a child is adults have a larger attention span. Not that much larger, but certainly larger. And so with adult stories, you can write them with a little more complexity, and I think the reader would appreciate it. Myself, I didn't read the book Dracula until I was an adult. I had heard about it, and I saw a lot of the movies when I was not an adult. And I'm kind of glad I went that route, because as an adult, when I read Dracula, the book, it was kind of awesome. It was, I liked the way that the book was written. I liked the style that the book was written, and I kind of adapted that into my own writing style. And a lot of books from that time period, the late 19th century, were sort of written in that style, and I kind of liked that style. And that's how we adapted it into our books. And for what we're writing, essentially is a science fiction book, and burlesque parody is really what genre we're in. We're taking a science fiction story and we're writing it in what would be a burlesque parody. We're parodying a well-known comic book story, but it's in a burlesque style. So instead of a whole lot of violence, there'll be a lot more sex in the book, and there has to be a sexual theme in the story. And but where we're trying to differ ourselves from other people is we're trying to write it in a way that's not vulgar, trying to write it in a way that's pleasant. And it just gets back to the whole TOS issue. I don't know if our stories are against TOS. Like, if you're writing, like, you can't have like nudity in a story because that makes sense. It's a visual thing. There are kids watching, during the day, it's against the TOS to do that. But describing nudity is not a visual thing, right? So, how does that actually work in terms of, if you read the TOS, everything is based on visual, but it's not, the rules don't apply to something that's descriptive, which a book is descriptive. So since there's no real rule or guideline for us to follow, we have to sort of look at what the rules are and sort of try to meet their organization halfway. And I think if ever questioned, they'll see we made an effort to do that. I think if you're trying to make an effort to be responsible with what you're doing, I think they would respect you more in that sense. And without guidelines, there's nothing really follow. YouTube doesn't really have a whole lot of guidelines in that, but we base it on the availability of movies that are available on YouTube. Like, our stories would fall between what would be PG-13 and a rated R movie. which would be a motion picture sort of. And so if you use the Motion Picture Association rating system for our books, we would be between what would be PG. There used to be, when I was growing up, it was just PG. And then somewhere in the late 80s, it became PG-13 and NC-17. I don't really know what that means. But you only had 3 letters when I was growing up. There was G, PG, and R. And then it became PG-13, and then I think they've added letters to that. But anyway, and then video games have a mature, RP sort of rating. I tend to go with the motion picture one because it's better defined as a definition that you can practically use. So, and that being if you have something that's PG-13 or rated R, if you have something rated R, like if we have we can't have any kind of drug sort of usage in our story. You can talk about it. You can sort of like a show like Miami Vice. You had the people exchanging doing the crime, but you didn't actually see people in a show using narcotics. See what I'm saying? They couldn't do it. And back in the 80s and late 70s, on television, before 10 o'clock, you couldn't have shows like that on TV. They had to be at the 10 o'clock time slot. That's why Miami Vice was at the 10 o'clock time slot. Then you could have more adult sort of theme. But I feel our novels we're not really, we haven't passed the rated R thing. We're sort of just right at rated R. Though they're very descriptive, I didn't think they are vulgar or explicit language is being used. Because I don't usually use explicit language in my writing. And I do that from a word choice point of view. I think it's better. I think it's more creative as a writer if you can not use explicit language, because I think it shows more creativity on choice of the writer itself in terms of skill. But that being said, I don't think that if a person uses explicit language, I don't think that without having read what they actually wrote, I don't think you can just say that, well, it has explicit language, it's no good. I don't believe that. I think you have to look at what they wrote under the context that they're writing. And I've read a lot of fan fiction. A lot of fan fiction in the genre that we're writing is pretty explicit stuff. And but you got to put it in context that the person writing it is a young guy or girl. They don't really have a lot of writing experience, and you're just using words that they understand themselves. And so in that sense, from an artistic point of view, it makes sense. But I've read a lot of fan fiction where I wish they would have not used as much explicit language, and I feel because, not that it's not creative, but it's, if every paragraph, let's say they wrote like 200-300 word, most fan fiction I see out there is about 500 to 1,000 word, which is 500 words is only about a half page. Half page. Our chapters are 12,000 word, and that's what it turns out. Once you put it in a 6x9 format, 12,000 words is about 10 to 12 pages of material. So 100, 200 words, it's barely a page. But most short stories I read are in a fan fiction genre, are about anywhere from 500 to 1,000 word sort of story, which is fine. And they use a lot of explicit language. But I find a lot of them stories are pretty enjoyable, but some of them are weird, but most of them are okay. But you can tell that the writer isn't really sort of finding themselves. And so when we wrote book 4 chapter was written before book 3 in this serial, and I did it because I was trying to develop a way of writing the sexual stuff more as a lyrical sort of musical way than a more anatomical way of doing it, because I feel when you're writing about sexual things, you're always taught that it only has to be enough to inspire people to use their imagination. So when you try to go the more anatomical way, more textbooky type way, it tends to bore the reader. And even if you use explicit language, if every paragraph is sort of the same thing, after about 5 paragraphs, people kind of get tired of it. And they kind of, let's move on. So I started looking towards songs. If you think of songs are very short stories. And there's usually 2 parts to a song. There's the main part, the idea that you're trying to get across, and then the bridge, or the refrain, some people call it, which repeats the same note. So if you think of like sexual intercourse in a story, or even a violent scene where people are fighting, which is sort of what sex is, it's an encounter between 2 people. Most people know what that is, even if they have never really been in a fight themselves. Most people over the age of 25 know what intercourse is, and they know all the different parts of it. And so I went the more lyrical way of doing it because I felt it was more musical in that sense as a writer. And it would be easier to explain, especially if you had a story where there were 3, 4, especially 12 chapters. You're going to have maybe 12 different encounters at minimum in a story. So it made more sense to write it from a lyrical way of doing. And so in book 4, chapter 1, that's why it was written that way. And then once I had a really good sense of that, then as I wrote the scene at the end of chapter 1 in book 3, there's a big scene between Hippolyta and Cyrus Gold. And Cyrus, he was resurrected in the story through Athenata, and that's the first time Hippolyta and Cyrus had been together in 50 years, so we kind of had to give them their little moment. And it would the only place in the story where I felt you could do that. And then the rest of the book, our group is broken up into 3 major parts, and there's 3 different stories going on within the book. And then the book doesn't really end. And the way book 3 is written was book 1, we introduced the main 3 characters. Book 2, we sort of introduced the Wayne family history, was the big one. And then you sort of meet Helmut Stryker in the second story, and then you meet Alan Scott, and then in the third story is where we were really going to get to meet the metahumans, because at this point in the serial we haven't really met any other than Alan Scott. But Alan Scott's not really a metahuman. He's an altered human because he wears a ring of power, and that's what gives him his power. He uses an artifact to gain his power, basically. So in book 3 we actually have metahumans in our story, and that's where we go to No Man's Land. And in our serial we made that Alan Scott own No Man's Land. If you play DC Universe Online, No Man's Land is a bar down in Metropolis on the south side of the North Island. And then down in the Suicide Slums is where No Man's Land is. You can actually walk by it and run by it. And where all the Aquaman people are fighting down there is where the bar is located. But in our story, we moved it to Gotham City. In our fan fiction, Gotham County is Baltimore County, and so it's in a real place. And I'm familiar with that area. I lived in Maryland from the end of 1996 all the way to about 2004. I lived in Maryland. I'm pretty familiar with the area. Baltimore County, Rockville, Montgomery County, Frederick, Hagerstown. I lived in Hagerstown. I've been all the way up to Carlisle, all through Pennsylvania. I'm familiar with that area. I worked in Adams County. I worked at the Pentagon. So the job I had, we were constantly on the move. So we were either at the Pentagon, we were in Adams County, Pennsylvania, or we were all the way up in Carlisle. And it's quite a hike, but I'm familiar with Virginia because when I was in the Navy, I was in Virginia, and so I figured we put Gotham City there. It makes sense. And then Atlanta in our story is where Central City is going to be located. So, like in our serial, where you get the first 1940 part of the serial, which goes from 1943 to 1945, essentially. And then the story splits in two parts. And then that's pretty much the original cast of the William Marston serial, which is the golden age of DC. But then when we get into the 1950s, that's the silver age, and then our cast pretty much changes. And then we move our character to Athens, Georgia. And then in Athens, Georgia, she raises her daughter. She becomes a mom, and a single mom. And then Book of Diana is basically the first 5 years of the daughter. And then the way I think we're going to structurally do it is when we split up our three couples, Etta, Diana or Athenata, and Steve Trevor, when we break them up in the last book, I don't know what the actual book number will be, but the actual working title for that is something about endings or something like that. So it's going to call it endings because, or I wanted to call it changes. Is what I wanted to call it, because you know the song Changes with David Bowie, and that's sort of the idea of the book. And why I wrote book 20 first was because as I'm writing these stories, I need to know, well, how do we end up breaking up these people if they're together in this rock solid relationship? What is the thing that broke them up? And then I figured these three people wouldn't have just broke up over some stupid stuff. It would have been something major that broke them up. And then so what we ended up doing is we had the heroine in the story be accidentally sent to another universe. and then the time that she comes back to Earth, the parallax effect, basically she only lives 30 days, but everybody else lives 5 years. So, and if you have a character who has a truth vision, who has to deal with reality and truth, I think it would be a really good story, because then you're dealing with, everybody else is dealing with the reality that they know it, which is 5 years, and she's dealing with her reality, which is it's only been 30 days. So, but both realities are true. So at some point in the story, when we break it up, she's only lived 30 days, everyone else has lived 5 years. So where do we connect those up? And I'm thinking with the other people's sort of point of view in the story, they would, if we told it in the same 3-book series, that would be really cool, because Book of Diana spans a 5-year period of time, so there's no reason why you can't span a 5-year period of time in one book. But I think to align all the stories together, you'd have the story where they're broken up, which is book 1. Then book 2 is where she goes to Apocalypse. That's a 30-day period of time. And then Book of Diana, I'm thinking what we're calling chapter 6, we're going to move to chapter 8. And so for the first 8 chapters, it's basically the first 5 years. And then the last 4 chapters is a 4-week period of time, from the time that Hippolyta shows up and to the time Steve Trevor meets her daughter. It's only a 4-week period of time. We have to keep the January 1st of 1955 date, because the day that Hippolyta sees Diana is because in history, that's the day Rosa Parks sat on the bus. Was it in Birmingham? I forget where it occurred, but that's the actual day that occurred. And so when we're writing our stories, part of what you want to do in fiction is you want to tie it to some real world event. So this history is going on. And then a month later, January 28th, 1956 is when Elvis is first shown on TV. So we kind of want to write everything within that time period. But the book 5 ends where, not book 5, Book of Diana ends, which is, we're going with book 20 at this point. But when the little girl meets the father for the first time. But the book ends when she's walking out the door to go see her father, and that's how the book ends. And then the next book, which is called the Book of Joe West, deals with how he's born. But how he's born is told in chapter 10 of Book of Diana. The circumstances which haunts his whole entire life is told in chapter 10 of Book of Diana. And then the circumstances of his mother and father, and why they ended up never getting married. It's pretty powerful story, I think. And then it picks up for the next 20 years. And then that's what the Book of Joe West would be a pretty good story. And then, so that's where we're at. Okay, I'm going to start reviewing this. Let me make this bigger. It's already 3 o'clock, so we got about 2 hours to get some reviewing in. We're still reviewing this is book 2, so we're going to play as much as we can, but if I feel the language might violate a TOS policy, we'll mute it. I'll still be able to hear it. The words will flash on the screen, but I'll just mute out the audio. And I think we'll be safe at that point. So here we go. Let me make sure the space bar works.
And strength. Besides,
it's working. Here we go. Okay, let's go. So here our ladies are going to sit at the indoor pool. Wayne's Manor has a couple indoor pools, and this is one of them. Remember, it's December in the story, and our cast is sitting out in an indoor heated pool.
you should see the outfit that Diana has picked out for us to wear tonight for the iceberg lounge. They will melt some icebergs tonight, she said. Perhaps they will attract some penguins tonight. I joked, beware of the penguins, Etta. Hippolyta joked back. Hippolyta jumped into the pool. She traversed across the pool with her powerful arms. I jumped in after her. I would admit, I was curious to see if the Amazon garment would stay on. As the clothes felt like I had nothing on, I looked down to see if they were still on. When I saw that they were still securely on my body covering my breast and labia, I had gained some confidence in the durability of the outfit. I took some breast strokes across the pool to see if they would stay on. With each stroke that I made across the pool, my fear of the suit ripping away from my body diminished. In a short time, my anxiety about the clothes completely diminished from my mind. As the anxiety subsided, I became excited to tell Hippolyta about Evan Miles. I met a wonderful man today. He would be wonderful for Elizabeth. I said, are you two trying to set me up with a date already? Elizabeth said. We turned to see Elizabeth. I smiled and said, I just felt that Evan Miles would be the perfect man for you, Elizabeth. Elizabeth walked over and removed her robe. She was wearing a simple one-piece black swimsuit. Elizabeth had a nice pear-shaped frame. I would venture to guess that she measured about 32 to 34 inches. For a woman in her late 40s, Elizabeth had a beautiful physique, with long beautiful raven black hair. She was not a tall woman and stood at an average height at 5 feet and 7 inches. Her face was a kind face. Her facial expressions were sharp. She had a real grace about her. She laid back on the chair trying to get her body into a comfortable position. I am not familiar with Evan Miles, Elizabeth said. He runs the stables on the property. I met him today while I was exploring the manor. He is a nice man about your age. He has a warm and caring personality. I said, how do you know we would fit together well, Etta? I have a feeling, you two have a way about you that is sort of commanding and kind. He spends his day caring for horses, and you spend your days running a large company. Also, he has a huge man tool. Hippolyta and Elizabeth laughed. Yes, it's been some time since I had one of those. Elizabeth said, you have that same aura about you, Elizabeth, that Diana had when I met her. That distant lost look with the weight of the world on your shoulders. But he offered to give me a riding lesson tomorrow morning, and I want to see if I can test ride that horse in the country before you saddle up with Evans, Elizabeth. I said, I love you, Etta Candy, Elizabeth said. Silas and Patrick had made their way to the pool room. How they knew we were here, I did not know. They each wore a pair of swimming shorts. They had some towels that they sat down on an empty chair.
I guess we should explain that dialogue there with Elizabeth. The scene where Etta met Evan Miles when she was walking around Wayne Manor. He runs the stables there, and she's trying to set Elizabeth up with this guy. In our story, Elizabeth hasn't been with a guy since her husband died. He died in the 1930s. Her husband is not Alan Wayne, but anyway, yeah, Alan Wayne. Anyway, so she's trying to set it up, so she's filling this guy out, and she kind of wants to have sex with the guy too. But he's an older guy in his 40s, and she's 23 in the story. So she's basically telling Elizabeth in the story that, hey, I'm going to check the guy out, make sure he's good for you, and then you can have him. It's basically what she told him. And then when she said that, Elizabeth said, I love you. She was like, because she was just kind of being open about it and kind of being honest about it. And the way she says it in the story is just, she just throws it out there. No real filter mechanism. And Elizabeth being political, she's like, okay, I love you. And then here come the guys. And so they're in Wayne Manor, and they're in one of the indoor pool rooms. And remember, it's December, so it's cold outside. And so the women are out there. They didn't even know they were going to be swimming. They're just out there swimming. Here come the guys all ready to go show up. And I think that's typical of most guys. Most guys, 20-year-old guys, see 3 women sitting out there by the pool, they're going to show up. It's just the way life works.
Chair. Patrick walked over to the bar and opened a cabinet that housed a radio and phonograph player. He turned on some music for us to listen to. Should I fire up the grill? Silas asked. I think that is a wonderful idea. Silas, I will call over to have Manfred take out some food for us. What kind of food should we grill? Elizabeth asked. I am kind of a simple hamburger and French fries kind of gal. I said. How about some hot dogs? Patrick asked. Hot dogs? Hippolyta asked. We all looked at her. You do not know what hot dogs are, Hippolyta? I asked. I am hoping it is not a grilled dog. Hippolyta said. We all...
Now, you got to remember, in our serial, Hippolyta hasn't been to the U.S. since 1895. So the hot dog, which became the hot dog was actually invented kind of in that time period, officially invented. But it becomes popular because baseball becomes a popular sport in the country, which becomes the national sport at some point. Football was popular in the United States, but it was popular at the collegiate level. It was sort of become a professional sport at that point. But baseball was clearly in 1890s and the early first 10 years of the 20th century was the dominant sport in this country. And so she wasn't in the country at that time. And then so she missed the hot dog. So she's sitting there and all these people talking about hot dogs. She's like, woo, whoa, what's a hot dog? And so they're having to explain to her. And you have to constantly, I like in the story where the mortals are having to explain like pop culture to the immortals in the story. And it's kind of fun in the story, I think.
All laughed. No. Diana didn't know what hot dogs were either when we first met. Hot dogs are a colloquial term applied to a pork or meat product or dish that is similar to sausage. They just are not as rich in peppers and other spices that sausage is made from. You grill them up or can fry them up like a burger. Then, you place the meat inside a hot dog bun. In the United States, they have become a popular product in our current popular culture. I said, okay. It is a type of sandwich, kind of like a Greek wrap or Greek gyro sandwich. Hippolytus.
Now the computer doesn't know how to say hero, but we can, when we do the next process where we actually add the voice actors in, that will correct any of those type of typos. Right now, we're just happy that the computer can pronounce about 98% of the words that are there, and so. The writing itself is correct, but the computer just doesn't say it correctly. but it's a hero sandwich, and that's sort of what a hot dog is, really a Greek wrap, basically. Sort of how a bun comes around. But you'd be amazed that if you've been to a lot of bars, people have very opinionated on what a hot dog is. And I thought it would be fun to have that sort of conversation going on here. And then here you have the Waynes, these billionaires, and they're sitting around. What do you want to eat in this pool party? They want to eat. Ada's basically a burger and hot dog kind of person. She says, and then they're all, I love hot dogs, and that's basically how they ended up eating. And Hippolyta was like, okay. And it's kind of show too that Hippolyta is kind of a laid back person. Whatever, we'll eat whatever. And then this is the last time we're going to get to see the cast here all together, because from this scene going forward, it's where we split them all up. And then the whole second half of the book is basically told from the inside of Diana's head, her mind, because she absorbs Solomon Grundy, who's Cyrus Gold, and she lives his entire life, his life leading up to how he becomes Solomon Grundy, and then the 50 years that he was in the ground, and then he's sort of resurrected. And so that's the whole last half of the book. So this is the last opportunity we could get to sort of see the whole cast. And then in book 3, the next story is actually told in 2 parts. There's book 3 and book 4. And then so in book 3, we then take the people who are the protagonists in this story, we flip it around, and they become the antagonists in the story, and the people who are the villains become the protagonists in book 3. And so the protagonists are the ones driving the story. And there's 3 different stories in book 3. And then the way book 3 ends, our heroes end up in 3 different bad places. It's sort of a real crappy place. And then in book 3, we flip it around. Or book 4, they flip back. And then it leads to book 4, which is book 4 is how it's the first night that it's the first weekend they're staying in the Brownstone estate, and it's about 2-3 weeks later in the timeline of the story where this story takes place, and it's the beginning of January. It's 1944. It's 4 months prior to the invasion of Europe. This story takes place in this week, and book 3 takes place, which was sort of the 12 days of Christmas, was sort of the idea. But that's when General Eisenhower supported the Supreme Commander during this week. That's why the story was set at that time. and then that's sort of the backdrop going up. What's driving the timeline of the story is the war. And so let's go on.
Said, exactly. Hippolyta, I said, they must have been developed after my last time I was in the country, in the 1890s. She said, after spending some time swimming in the pool, I had decided to step out of the pool to relax in the beach chair or deck chair. As I rose up out of the water with my tiny bra and C-string on, the room became quiet. The men had stopped what they were doing and stared at my body. I smiled and walked over to the chair to...
Now here comes Ada out of the pool. She's wearing this bathing suit, basically. Remember, the bikini wasn't officially invented until the 1950s. But the concept of the bikini comes from thousands of years ago. The Greek apodesmos and perizoma is the precursor to what becomes the bikini. And so in this picture, this is Bo Derek when she was doing Tarzan the Ape Man, which is similar to that style. But it's not exactly that style, but it's close. So to find her and Linda Carter, who were casted as Hippolyta in the story, and so to find them both in sort of that style was pretty good. And there's no shortage of photos of finding Bo Derek in bikinis, but finding Linda in a bikini is really tough. Really hard to do. And so here she comes up out of the water. She's wearing this bikini, and then people didn't realize she was wearing it, and then all the guys were sitting there, and then she comes up out of the water and it's practically naked. It's Presley, remember this is 1943 that she's wearing this, and it's kind of shocking.
Elizabeth looked over and asked, "Where did you get that swimsuit?" "Etta, Diana gave it to me for my birthday. It is a Amazon Apodesmos and a Perizoma. She called the bottom a C-string. She said it would allow me to show off my curves." I said, "That it does. Etta, with your smile and that outfit, I grow to love you more with every minute. Etta, you make me wish that you were my daughter." "Etta, thank you Elizabeth. Just wait for Hippolyta to step out of the pool. She has the same style of suit and a super body profile," I said, using a nearby phone. Elizabeth called Manfred to bring over some hot dogs, hamburgers, and sausages. Hippolyta walked out of the pool to sit down. Again, Silas and Patrick stared at her in admiration. She sat down in the deck chair next to mine. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. As time went on in the afternoon and after we had grilled some hot dogs and hamburgers, Alan Scott had returned to the manor shortly after 3 o'clock. He was dressed in a blue suit and tie. "I see that I have returned at the perfect time, although I am probably overdressed for the afternoon activities. I didn't bring my swim shorts, so I guess that I will have to sit back and enjoy the view." Alan said, "Yes, we have grilled hot dogs and grilled hamburgers." Elizabeth said, "They smell fantastic. I will take 2 bacon cheeseburgers." Alan said, "Of course, I will get them started." Manfred said, "Steve and Diana are not back from DC yet?" Alan asked. "No, they have not returned yet. Diana and Steve are working out some operational details for tonight's mission to the Iceberg Club. Diana needed to pick up some shoes for our outfits tonight. They are on their way back now." I said, "I will wait for them to return before I brief the group." Alan said. Alan went about the time relaxing by the pool. As we all laid by the pool and ate our food, I noticed that Hippolyta's mind was distant. I was able to see into her mind that she was thinking about someone. I walked over and sat down next to the chair next to her. "What's on your mind, Hippolyta?" I asked. "My mind was drifting away on a person I knew from long ago." Hippolyta said, "You cared a lot about her. I can see that her name was Margaret Shaw." "Who was she?" I asked. Hippolyta smiled as her mind filled with the memories of Margaret Shaw. I could see that her mind was recalling sights, sounds, smells, and textures of Margaret. "Margaret Shaw was a good friend. We were like sisters, but we were lovers." Hippolyta said, "Tell me about her, Hippolyta." "When I came to Gotham in 1893, I came here to help Judge Solomon Wayne with his investigation of the death of his brother, Joshua Wayne. He had been murdered in town behind a local theater. Margaret had been Joshua's date to the theater that night. She had witnessed the murder and could provide an eyewitness account of the murder to convict Vincent Falcone. To investigate the crime, I went undercover as a prostitute at the Iceberg Club." She said. "The Iceberg Club? That is the same place that we are going tonight?" I asked. "Yes, it is the same place." Anyway, Margaret Shaw was another prostitute that had worked there with me from December 1893 until December of 1894. She was my trainer there, and we both had worked together for a long time. She introduced me to Cyrus Gold. He called on Margaret and myself frequently. She was a good friend. She was, in many ways, like you, Etta. She was a young, vibrant woman. She was always full of energy and life. Like you, Etta, she was an Aries. Hippolyta said. "What happened to her?" I asked. "I do not know. After I had rescued her and Cyrus Gold from the Iceberg Club, she disappeared. I used a magical scribe to search for them, but it was not able to locate them. Apparently, their whereabouts was blocked by some magical protection. I feel that her story and Cyrus Gold's story are coming full circle now," Hippolyta said. Alan walked over after listening to some of Hippolyta's conversation with me. He pulled out a copy of an old newspaper article. "Your story, Hippolyta, sheds some light on this news article I found this morning while doing some research," Alan said. Alan handed the newspaper clipping to Hippolyta. The article had a bold headline that read, "News article to Cyrus Gold and star witness, Margaret Shaw for the Joshua Wayne's murder investigation missing." December 15, 1894. The police raided the Iceberg Club after Wayne Manor had been attacked by what eyewitnesses have described as a large monster. Several people including Vincent Falcone and Theodore Cobblepot were arrested for the murder of Joshua Wayne. Several eyewitnesses described that a massive explosion was heard from the club prior to the police arrival. The police were able to track the creature's footprints to the club. District Attorney Cyrus Gold and Margaret Shaw were on their way back to Wayne Manor using a private coach Judge Solomon Wayne had hired for the evening. The search party found the coach along the road near Slaughter Swamp. The coach had been attacked by an unknown group of posses believed to be Confederates of Vincent Falcone. The owner of the coach company reported the cab was missing after it failed to arrive at Wayne Manor on time. The police were not able to comment on the incident that occurred at Wayne Manor earlier in the evening. Only the cab driver and another occupant, Saline Kyle, the secretary for DeGold, were found near the cab earlier this morning. The two were found unconscious near the site that the cab was located. Cyrus Gold and Margaret Shaw are being filed as missing by local authorities. As I researched Cyrus Gold's name from Diana's facsimile of her psychic vision we all saw the other day, I wanted to see if I could find any local news about him. I learned that Cyrus Gold had been the local district attorney in Gotham City. He turned up missing in 1894. Vincent Gold's and Theodore Cobblepot's cases fell apart when the federal investigators failed to produce the eyewitness to the crime in the Joshua Wayne murder investigation. Allen said, "Yes, their whereabouts to this day are unknown by the authorities." Elizabeth said, "Did you know Solomon Wayne, Elizabeth?" Hippolyta asked. "I was born in 1897. Solomon died in 1904 when I was only 8 years old. I understand that he was 65 years old when he had died." Kenneth, "My husband was 18 years old at the time. He had fond memories of his grandfather, Solomon. I first met Kenneth in 1916. He was an officer serving in the war. He had regaled me with many stories of Solomon Wayne. So, my only knowledge of Judge Solomon Wayne was through personal stories from Kenneth Wayne." Elizabeth said, "I knew Solomon, Joshua, and Alan Wayne. It was Solomon's father, Charles Arwin Wayne, that had introduced us together in 1841, and he was instrumental in my ability to acquire a medical degree in the 19th century, which was considered impossible for women to become in those days. I had been Solomon's doctor when he was injured at the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. I had to use our advanced Amazon medical training to repair his injuries and to help his body heal. He never did completely heal from those injuries. His son, Alan, was born shortly before the battle. I had to help him write his correspondences to his wife, Amelia Wayne." Hippolyta said, "The news reports of a monster attacking Wayne Manor in 1893 sounds familiar to our friend, Solomon Grundy. Do you think they are connected?" Alan asked. "I suspect that they are, Alan. I never saw the creature that attacked Wayne Manor that night of December 14, 1894, and no one referred to the monster as Solomon Grundy at the time. I remember that Cyrus and I had just helped Margaret to escape the club that afternoon so that she could be put up in a safe house here at Wayne Manor. We were both intercepted by Confederates of Vincent Falcone. By the time I had managed to escape my bondage at the basement of the Iceberg Club, the police had stormed the building and arrested everyone there. Solomon Wayne arrived at the club with the police and Margaret, Cyrus, and myself were let free. I rode back to Wayne Manor in Solomon's coach. Cyrus, Margaret, and Saline had rode back in another coach." Hippolyta said, "Coach?" I asked. "Yes, in 1894, people rode on horseback. Automobiles had not been invented in the mortal realm, so a team of horses with wagons or coaches were how people traveled long distances in those days. That is where the term stagecoach comes from. To travel from Wayne Manor to Gotham City required one to travel through Slaughter Swamp." Hippolyta said, "There seems to be a likely connection there with Slaughter Swamp, Wayne Manor, Cyrus Gold, and Solomon Grundy." I said, "If this article is true, then Vincent Falcone must be 70 or 80 years old by now. Is he immortal too?" Alan asked. "Vincent Falcone has connections with powerful people who know of the ways of magic. Goddess Kirky, God Ares, and Ra's al Ghul are amongst these people. In 1893 and 1894, they had soul stones placed all around the club to block out psychic visions and other magical surveillance methods from spying on their operations. I suspect those relationships still exist. He may have magical influences that keep him young and vibrant. It would be a mistake to think that the Iceberg Club will be an easy place to investigate tonight." Hippolyta said. We all spent the rest of the afternoon relaxing by the indoor pool and eating grilled food. After that, Hippolyta and I returned to my room to shower and change for the evening. We had dressed in simple jeans and t-shirts while we waited for Diana and Steve to return to the manor.
Steve Trevor's journal.
Okay, it's kind of review. It's kind of lengthy, but in that later part, we were using Hippolyta, a writing perspective. Hala is the device we were using to set up the end of the story, and I feel that you kind of had to do that because the end of the story had so many moving parts, even though it's only really told through two of the characters. There's so many moving parts at the end of the story that we had to sort of prep the reader before they got there. But you had to do it in a way that gave a quick, here's what's going on, here's the order in which things are going to proceed, and then bam. And the later part of the book is very complex in how we break the story up, and it's told intertwined with two different characters. Actually, 4 different characters. You count the supporting characters. But we needed to prep the reader. I felt that you needed to prep the reader for that, and we used Hippolyta as that device to do that. And that was the last time we were going to get to see the entire cast of people together before we get to the next book. And so from this moment on in the story, we break up everybody, and then they start going their separate ways. And then this story is actually a really simple story in terms of plot. It's only really, here's this guy, he's got a problem. The guy being Alan, what's his name? Alan Scott. He's got a problem. He needs a resolution. He goes to his friend Steve. He's with the federal government. And Elizabeth is the person that hired Alan. So, and that's pretty much the story. And the resolution of the story is pretty good. Then we're introduced to the subplot where Athena comes to Athenata, or Diana Prince, in a story and tells her about these 2 people. And then this story deals with the first half of that, which is Cyrus Gold's story. So his story is fairly simple. Celine Kyle's story is very complex. And Celine Kyle's story, although it starts in this book, is told over a 40-year period of time. So this is the very beginning of what's going on with her, but her whole path of redemption, which is the title of the book, takes 40 years to meet its resolution, when her and Vincent Falcone are killed by Carmine Falcone. But in the story, Celine Kyle, who's the mother of Selina Kyle, she is going to become the Garcan queen. In our mythology here, you have 2 group of people. You have the Titans, who are the main gods, and then you have the Gargans, who are sort of they're Titans too, but they're sort of the way nature balanced out the story. And she's destined to be the Gargan queen in the story, part of the triumvirate for the forces of chaos. And that's tied to our story of Trigon and the story of the orb of Prometheus. But in the story, they don't know that. But as you're writing a serial, remember, you have that particular book, but there's a larger story going on. And so you always have to be mindful of that, and as the writer. And that's all I really wanted to say about that. Let's go on.
Tuesday afternoon, December 14th, 1943, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Diana and I had arrived back at Wayne Manor in the afternoon after our meeting at the War Department early in the morning in Washington, D.C. We had spent the time after our meeting developing an operational plan for tonight's surveillance mission at the Iceberg Club. Since some of the group were not military personnel, it was important to make the plan simple. In the event that something went wrong tonight and we were discovered by the personnel at the Iceberg Club, we decided to set up some preliminary contingency plans. Together, we decided that the focus of the mission was to establish a link between the incident at Slaughter Swamp and magical scent at the Iceberg Club. At this point in our investigation, we did not have any empirical evidence that the club was linked to Solomon Grundy and the events at Slaughter Swamp. As we were intelligence agents for the War Department, We had a duty to investigate the club as we suspected they might have a connection with Nazi activity in the area. However, without material evidence, the kind of evidence that a court of law would require, it would be difficult to issue an arrest warrant or even a search warrant with the help of a magistrate. Using the computers on board Diana's ship, we were able to obtain some information. As it was a fascinating system, I inquired as to how the technology worked. Diana explained that the computers were tied to a central oracle, female deities. In the immortal realm, oracles were minions of the god Apollo. They possessed strong powers of knowledge and foresight. So, the Amazon computers on board Diana's ship were essentially living beings or spiritual beings. Much like the goddess Themis was a living god who resided as Diana's magic lasso, the computer systems on her ship were much the same thing. During this time, Diana had sent for a master seamstress or a dressmaker from Paradise Island. The dressmaker had arrived at the ship via what Diana referred to as a teleporter. Using the ship's internal systems, the dressmaker was able to craft 3 outfits for Diana, Etta, and Hippolyta to wear tonight at the club. The dressmaker had her cobbler make some footwear and other accessories for the 3 women to wear tonight that matched the style of dress. While the dressmaker and cobbler were crafting the clothes and shoes, Diana and I worked out the details of our tactical plans. Through her telepathy, Diana had learned through Etta and Hippolyta that the Queen had known Cyrus Gold in 1894. Etta had relayed the story Hippolyta had recalled to the rest of the group at the pool party they had at Wayne Manor while they were waiting on our return. 5 o'clock in the afternoon, an hour after we had returned to Wayne Manor, we had gathered the rest of the group in Diana's ship to go over the plan. Elizabeth, Silas, Patrick, and Manfred attended the meeting. Diana felt that tonight's operation had the possibility of involving the Wayne family, so, she felt that they should be in attendance to the meeting. Other than Diana, Etta, and Hippolyta, everyone else seemed fascinated by the internal systems of the ship. It was clear to the rest of us that the Immortal Realms technology was vastly superior to the Mortal Realms technology. I do not mean for that to seem that immortals were better than mortals. Clearly, I am recognizing that the technology is more advanced than mortal technology. The immortal realm had avoided the continual cycle of war and peace, and that avoided the many dark ages that plagued the mortal realm with having to relearn technologies over and over again. In contrast, Diana has told me that the underworld of Tartarus does not have any technology because that realm is in a constant state of anarchy and chaos. Diana began the meeting by giving an overview of the plan to the group. If you all will look towards the hollow emitter table, here is the Iceberg Club. Using data we collected by the oracles on the property, we pieced together a nice model of the club. The club is being masked by powerful sources of magic. Although the scent of the magic is from the goddess Kirki, that is not the main source of the spells. I speculate that the spell was cast by a younger spellcaster. The scent of the spell is weaker than that of the goddess Kirki. I suspect the caster is channeling spiritual energy from the goddess. Diana said, "So, we will have to enter the club blind." I said, "Hippolyta worked at the club in the 1890s. Etta said, "Yes, and I have added her knowledge to our database in the tactical plan." The club is still in the same building that existed in the 1890s. There have been some modifications to the club since that time period. We used Alan Scott's knowledge of the club to account for its current state. The original club was owned and operated by a Theodore Cobblepot. The current club is being operated by his son, Theodore Cobblepot, Jr. According to Alan's knowledge, the club is still used as a front for a high society escort service. The club features a stage for live entertainment and has an in-house orchestra composed of local musicians. The club has enjoyed a successful economic boom during the wartime period our country is currently involved in. Diana said, "I managed to get us invited to the guest list for tonight's entertainments." Alan added, "We must assume that the criminal elements using the club as a front for their criminal activities will be suspicious of us the moment we enter the club. So, if we encounter any hostile actions, we must be prepared to act. I suggest that we split off into 2 teams. Etta, Hippolyta, and Alan Scott will be Team 1, and Steve, Themis, and I will be Team 2. Diana said, "Now, Team 1's task will be to gather intelligence on key personnel in the club in case we need to do more than one mission at the club. You will focus on the upper levels of the building. You will be provided with cameras that will gather visual evidence that we can use to build a case for a federal indictment. I said, Team 2's task will be to collect intelligence in the lower sections of the club that will give us any information that can link the incidents with Solomon Grundy with the Iceberg Club. Diana said, in the event that we are captured or one of the teams are made by the criminal elements, our contingency plan is to escape the club and rendezvous back at the ship, which will be located at a nearby staging point. All of us will be armed with these pendants. They will act as homing beacons for the ship to teleport us out if we get into danger. Because we suspect the place has soul stones placed all about the property to prevent telepathic people from spying on the criminal activity, the pendants will be able to provide voice communications between the teams. Diana said, in the event that our voice communications fail to work for any reason, or we are separated in the operations, each team member will be armed with one of these devices. The device is a small crystal that will act as a neural neutralizer that can incapacitate a small group of people, should you need to get away quickly. Only use it in a last-ditch effort as it is a one-time use device. I said, does everyone understand the plan? Diana asked. It seems like a simple plan. Etta said, Themis will be recording the events of the evening for us. Diana said, okay, if there are no further questions or comments, we will go get ready for our mission. We plan to arrive at the club at 7 o'clock this evening. That gives us an hour to get ready and an hour to travel by car. Diana has had her dressmaker and cobbler make the dresses and shoes for tonight's operation for the ladies. I said. Etta and Hippolyta looked at the dresses that were on display. The dresses were satin strapless sheer sheath dresses with a slit. The shoes were open-toed sandals with stiletto heels. The design made the sandal appear to be a knee-high boot. However, the lace work in the front and sides of the boots were exposed to show off the long legs of the women. The bottom of the shoes were designed of nanocarbon fiber materials that were stronger than that industrial diamonds. I would not want to be on the receiving end of those heels, as they were cleverly disguised daggers. Wow, Diana, these dresses are amazing. Again, they are very revealing, as all of your Amazon outfits are. And, look at these shoes. Are these real diamonds? Etta asked. Of course. I would never make an outfit with inferior materials. The dressmaker said. What do you think of these dresses, Elizabeth? Etta asked. Can I get one in my size? Elizabeth asked. Certainly, I will have the dressmaker make one for you. Hippolyta said. The dresses are combat armor ready. They can withstand any form of attack in the mortal realm. In the event that bullets start flying, we will be protected. Etta's dress is designed with an Amazon girdle built into the waistline. Diana said. What does that do? Etta asked. It bestows the attributes of an Amazon Titan onto the host of the garment. Diana said. It magically boasts your mortal attributes to a Class 1 Titan or a Class 5 meta-human. You will have the same abilities as Diana and me. Hippolyta said. That enhances your basic anatomically modern human attributes to 15 times that of a normal AM. Whereas our powers are natural abilities, you must wear the outfit to use the powers. Diana said. Wait. So I am going to have superpowers too? Etta asked. Yes, that is what that means. Hippolyta said. Cool, Etta replied, and with that, everyone left the ship to go and to get ready for tonight's operation.
Themis's Journal, Tuesday evening, December 14, 1943, 6 o'clock in the evening. The following account is what occurred during the 6 o'clock hour.
Okay, so here's our group. Had our pointers seen. They explain what the operation was going to be. Everybody's part. They're essentially going to split into two groups. Steve, Diana, and Themis are going to be one group. Everybody else is in the other group. The primary group mission is to search the lower areas, and the second team is to search the upper areas of the club and gather intelligence. They're not going to do anything hasty. They're just going to go get information and leave abruptly. That's all their plan is. Simple. If they can find a connection, they're not expecting to find a connection tonight. They hope that that will be the result of it, but they highly likely of that happening the first night you go there. It's highly unlikely. But anyway, this is their best chance to collect data. 1 second. Anyway, so from this point out until we get to Alan Scott's journal, it's pretty much Themis. The first real chance we're going to get to hear from Themis since the first book. And she's a very important character. And here we go.
Hour until the 9 o'clock hour on December 14, 1943, after we all had left Diana's ship to return to the main house located at Wayne Manor in Gotham County, Maryland. The group consisting of Diana, Hippolyta, Steve, Etta, and Alan returned to their rooms to get ready for the operational mission. I had gone to Diana's and Steve's room to wait. Diana and Steve had spent much of the time showering together. To help the women get ready for the night, the dressmaker had some hairdressers and cosmetics specialists assist them. The whole event took about an hour to complete. At the end of the hour, the three women were fashionably ready for the night. Diana's dress was an emerald green dress. The color complemented her hair and skin tone. The sheer texture and lace pattern of the fabric used to make the sheath dress covered her bosom and labia. The rest of the material exposed much of her body to the casual observer. The dress was strapless and presented her breast in a beautiful display. To complement her dress, I transformed myself into an armband that wrapped across her right bicep. Etta Candy's dress was red in color, and Queen Hippolyta's was royal blue. Their dresses had wrapped around their female bodies with the same qualities as Diana's dress. The legs were all dress off to take advantage of the slit cut into the left side of the long dress of their outfits. Their footwear provided a nice silver or white color to contrast the main color of the dresses. As usual, their arms were trimmed off by their Amazon bracelets. Steve Trevor and Alan Scott were dressed in casual evening suits. They were not formal wear, as that would not be appropriate for the evening events of the night, but they were not business-styled in look. Diana had provided to Steve a belt to enhance his attributes and provide him protection from any hostile combat action they may face in the evening. Once the group was ready to leave, they all gathered in the parlor of Wayne Manor. Elizabeth agreed to watch over Paris and Walter tonight. The team decided to take 2 cars to the club. Team 1 took Hippolyta's car, and Team 2 took Diana's car. To fit into the period of time, Steve drove Diana's car, while Alan drove Hippolyta's car. As planned, the travel time to Gotham City was under an hour. 7 o'clock in the evening, our party had arrived at the Iceberg Club as planned. It was decided by the group to drive up and to get out at the front door rather than walk up. As Steve Trevor and Alan Scott were American celebrities, it would be proper etiquette for them to walk the red carpet. Diana and Hippolyta had set the cars to prowler mode. In that configuration, the cars would travel to predestinated positions to aid the ships in providing communications and recording functions from the group, and, if needed, the cars would provide the group with quick evacuation points. As the club was being protected by magical protection, Diana used the ship's onboard electronic systems to get around this limitation. I could communicate with the Oracle in the ship's computer at all times. Since Hippolyta had been familiar with the magical devices placed around the club from working here in 1893 and 1894, she developed electronic methods to get around those limitations. The group proceeded to enter the Iceberg Club. As they entered the lobby of the club, they were greeted by a female hostess. "Good evening. Do you all have a reservation for the night?" the hostess asked. "Yes, we are under the name Alan Scott. Reservation for 5. Alan said. The hostess scanned down her list of reservations and located the name. "Oh yes. Follow me. I will seat you," she said. Our group was led to a large room with a stage. The house orchestra was playing music for the audience's entertainment. There were large posters around the room. The signs read that Priscilla Rich would be performing tonight exclusively at the Iceberg Club. As our group entered the room,
There we go. Name dropped there. Easter egg there. Priscilla Rich was the original Cheetah in Wonder Woman series, and we casted what's her name? I know her name, it just escapes me at the minute. And that's who we caught me in a minute, but let's go on.
room. The room
So
became
Castor.
quiet as Diana, Hippolyta, and Etta entered the room. It was quite the spectacle. The ladies all smiled at the crowd. Steve and Alan seemed to be amazed at the reaction. I think that the crowd approves of your choice of dresses tonight, ladies, Steve said. The hostess smiled at Steve and then led us to our table. The table was located in a wing along the front of the stage. These tables are reserved for exclusive VIP members of the club. Alan said, "Who is Priscilla Rich?" Diana asked. "You don't know who Priscilla Rich is?" Etta asked.
Cameron Diaz. That's who it is. That's who we casted. It's from her from The Mask, I believe. It's when she was 25 age. Priscilla Rich. She's in the future going to become the Cheetah. In the original William Marston story, she was a woman who suffered from personality disorder and what some people call a split personality, but it's more like a borderline personality disorder, and she would just become this other person and she would act out she was afraid. Her anxiety was that people were cast her aside, I guess, and she didn't want that to happen. And she felt that Wonder Woman stole her thunder, basically, in the story. And so she set out to kill her in the story. But we figured we'd introduce her in this story, and at some point we're going to reintroduce her, but I don't want to make her a particular Wonder Woman villain. I figure she'd be a better villain for Batwoman, who's going to come in book 3 and book 4. And so we're setting up Priscilla Rich story. We introduce her here, but she doesn't really do a whole lot in this story, so that's who she is.
She is only America's premier starlet at the moment, Alan Scott said. "We are in for a treat, Diana. Priscilla is a wonderful singer," Steve said. The group sat at their table and settled in. Etta Candy led Diana out to the dance floor to warm up with a dance. As part of their plan, mixing into the crowd was their first goal for the evening. For the first hour, the group had blended into the crowd and danced together. The crowd seemed to be affected by the party's behavior. 8 o'clock in the evening. It was in the 8 o'clock hour that the teams decided to split up to gather intelligence. Team 2 went about exploring the main floor and lower levels of the building, while Team 1 went about exploring the upper levels of the building. For the first half hour of time, there was nothing really eventful to find. The club's only activity was mainly gambling and prostitution. It was during this time that Team 1 had encountered their first obstacle. While searching the lower level of the building, Diana's vision of truth revealed that members of the key personnel at the club and some Nazi intelligence personnel had discussed some details in the room. These events had not recently occurred. Diana's vision could pick up on all of the activities that occurred at this place throughout history. Using her instinct to discriminate through the visions, Diana was able to locate the spot in the wall that was used to travel to AEAEA, Greece. "What is it, Diana?" Steve asked. "I see something here in the wall. There used to be a magical portal here that led to AEAEA, Greece," she said. "Where is that?" Steve asked. "AEAEA is the island that goddess Kirky lives on in seclusion. The portal has not been used in some time, but I can detect that it once was at this spot. Also, I see a man and a woman here, and I see." Diana's statement is interrupted by a man's voice. "This is a very interesting turn of events, Major Trevor," the man said. As the man held a gun, Diana and Steve decided to play along so that they might be able to collect intelligence from the man. "I wouldn't make any sudden movements if I were you. The pretty lady may not like being shot, Major Trevor," the man said in a heavy German accent. "You seem to have us at a disadvantage, mister," Steve asked. "I am sorry, Major Trevor. I am Colonel Helmut Stryker. You and your escort will follow me to my office where we will conduct a proper interrogation of you and your party. If you cooperate, no one will be harmed, and, if you fail to cooperate, then I am afraid, you will never leave this place alive," he said. Team 2 was escorted to a nearby office, while Team 1 was found and led to the same place. In the office, after the party was brought together by the Confederates of Colonel Helmut Stryker, Steve Trevor decided to be the focal person for the interrogation. Due to cultural stereotypes, the Nazis believed their culture and polity was the superior master race. In their culture, women were subordinate to the men, so it was easy for Steve to play along with the charade of the weakened foe. Now Major Trevor, shall we begin the interrogation? Stryker said. Why are you here? He asked. My party is here as personal guest of Alan Scott while on vacation for the holidays. We decided to enjoy some of the city's amenities for the evening. Steve said. Why were your people snooping around the premises? Stryker asked. The man smiled. He made a motion to two of the guards and they grabbed Diana's arms on either side. Diana played along with the interrogation. Stryker raised his hand and smacked Diana in the face. Diana moaned in pain as the man struck her face. Now, Major Trevor, I do not want to have to demonstrate on your lady friend, but if you do not cooperate, you will force me to take action, he said. Steve acted frustrated as he thought to himself. The colonel motioned to his men again and they struck Diana again. Diana moaned in shock as the men struck her face. She changed the color of her face to match the physiological behavior of lightly bruised skin. She made her body sweat, and she made her eyes tear up. Okay, I will tell you. Steve paused for a moment to act like he needed to gather his composure. We were investigating reports about a large creature who attacked some local railway lines in the county owned by Wayne Consolidations and Consignments. The War Department suspected that Nazi agents were using the cover story of a mythical creature to conceal their attacks of local train traffic. Steve said, Good Major, now that you are cooperating, what do you know about the Clinton Engineering Works? Stryker asked. I do not know anything about that other than it is important to the War Department. Steve said. Do not mistake me for a fool, Major. I know that you are aware of the Clinton Engineering Works and the facility being built in Tennessee. Stryker said. Colonel Stryker turned to a large panel of glass that was on the far wall of the room. He motioned to one of the guards to draw the curtains open. Inside the next room was Etta, Alan, and Hippolyta. As he turned to look in the direction of the glass window, a young attractive woman entered the room. The weapon is on station, Colonel Stryker, she said. Thank you, Saline. I will require the services of the weapon to convince the Major to cooperate with us.
Here's the first time in the story we're actually getting to meet Celine Kyle. We've talked about her a lot. We haven't actually seen her in the story, and this is the first time we're getting to see her, and just getting to see some dialogue. She too is kind of really introduced in this story, and then in the next couple books she becomes more important, and we don't really know about her story until next book. But a lot of characters are being introduced in this story, but they don't have really major roles in the actual story itself. They're just going along.
Thus tonight, Stryker said. Who is she? Steve asked. This is Saline Kyle. She works here at this facility and provides key intelligence capabilities for us, but do not worry about her. She is going to convince you to provide us the information we seek, or your Confederates in the next room will die, Stryker said. Colonel Stryker turned and motioned to the guards in the next room on the other side of the glass window. The two guards raised the steel door on the far side of the room. As the door rolled up out of the way, Solomon Grundy the Undead was revealed. His manner was calm and at peace. His expression was cold and his body was decayed. If you fail to answer my questions, Major Trevor, then I will order the death of your Confederates, one at a time, starting with the brunette. Now, to demonstrate my power, I will kill the brunette woman, he said. The colonel motioned to Saline Kyle to order the monster to attack Hippolyta. Saline raised her arms and the creature came to life and hurled his body at Hippolyta. Hippolyta stood calm and patient in the face of the monster's attack. Solomon Grundy lifted Hippolyta into the air to smash her body onto the ground, but, as the creature raised her lithe body into the air, his eyes met her gaze. Hippolyta's gaze had an unpredicted effect on Solomon Grundy. He seemed to be confused and uncertain. Cyrus, is that you? Hippolyta asked. Then, Solomon Grundy spoke. Hippolyta, he said in a deep slow voice. He set the queen down as she gave the foul beast a hug of compassion and love. The Nazi agents seemed bewildered by the change of events. In a fit of rage and from a bit of embarrassment, Colonel Stryker ordered Saline to have the creature attack Etta Candy.
Here we're getting to see the Nazis weren't expecting this. They were expecting him to just kill her, but unknown to them, these two people were lovers before they were together, and he loved her, and that survived through his death. Remember, he's an undead person, and part of his brain but has survived, but he's part plant, part animal. So that's also why the Green Lantern power didn't work on him, is because it doesn't affect plants. And I thought it would be cool if their love story sort of centered around all this, and would be the reason why he sort of comes back as a character and makes him sort of a tragic character in that sense. And I thought it would be funny that the Nazis were like, oh my god, dang it, she thwarted us, kill the other one. That'd be kind of cool.
Pauline Kyle carried out the order and commanded Solomon Grundy to attack Etta Candy. It was in that moment that Alan Scott revealed himself as the Green Lantern.
Alan Scott's Journal, Tuesday night, December 14, 1943, 9 o'clock in the evening. The following account was recorded after the events took place on Tuesday night. These are the details of my unsuccessful battle with the undead creature, Homo Zombia, at the Iceberg Club, as Themis.
Now here in our story, it's our first opportunity to have a combat scene. And just like we did with the sexual intercourse scenes, we have two frames side by side. It comes down to two characters. And remember, our story is a burlesque parody, so although we have violence in the scene and we want them to be important, like the sexual intercourse, they're not the most important part of the story. So how we write the dialogue for the scene is we don't want it to be a point-by-point procedure on fighting. We just want it to be enough to entertain the reader and to get our point across, but you don't want to be too vague in our description that it's sort of doesn't carry the weight. You have a big brute, Solomon Grundy, here in the Alan Scott, and this was a classic story going all the way back in the original version of the story. It was centered around three characters: Solomon Grundy, Alan Scott, and Wonder Woman. And he lost the battle, and Wonder Woman had to come in there and save them. She lost too, so we kept that element in our story, but our twist is because it's a burlesque parody and because we can have sexual themes in a story, we decided to have a twist in the story using our sexual intercourse with the character.
As journal entry stated earlier in this report, Team 2 had been led to a large room in the lower level of the Iceberg Club. As planned, we had went along with the facade as helpless victims when arrested by the Nazi agents in the club. In our attempt to fool the Nazi agents into providing us valuable intelligence, Steve and Diana had exposed themselves to an interrogation session with Colonel Helmut Stryker. During this session, Colonel Stryker had revealed Solomon Grundy to our investigation. Unfortunately, to stress his point of superior power, Stryker had ordered Pauline Kyle to command Solomon Grundy to attack Hippolyta. However, this attack proved unsuccessful. Solomon Grundy seemed to recognize Hippolyta for a reason unknown to me at the time, but will be revealed later in this report. Out of frustration, Colonel Stryker ordered the death of Etta Candy. Unsure of what to do in the moment, I acted on instinct. In the moment, I transformed myself into the Green Lantern. Oh no, it is the Green Lantern. One of the guards shouted. He will prove no match for Solomon Grundy. Solomon, kill the Green Lantern.
I thought that would be a fun dialogue, have just one of the underlings, oh no, it's the Green Lantern. And then Pauline Kyle's like, he'll prove no match for Solomon Grundy. She's the one actually controlling the zombie. Yeah, we call him the Homo Zombia. Give him a scientific name. Kind of like Homo sapien. Homo in Greek means same. Zombia.
Salim Kyle ordered, and I shall shed my light over dark evil, for the dark things cannot stand the light of the Green Lantern, I proclaimed. Using my power ring, I blasted a hole into the side wall of the room. As this revealed itself to be an exterior wall, it created an escape route for the women as part of our extraction plan. Uncertain of the creature's limitations, I tried to make my way to help Steve and Diana in the other room on the other side of the glass window. However, before I could act, Solomon Grundy moved with amazing swiftness and put himself between the glass window and me. His action made it certain that if I was to aid my friends, I would have to cross his path. Solomon looked around the room for any nearby objects. He was able to find a large steel table and hurl it at my body. Using the ring, I enabled a power shield around my body. The steel table smashed against the force field and fell to the ground. I was unharmed. I used the ring of power to create a beam of light to separate some metal structures in the ceiling of the room. The large objects fell on Solomon Grundy successfully as I had planned, but the attack did not seem to faze him. Again, Solomon Grundy found a large metal object nearby and hurled it at my body. The attack proved unsuccessful. My force field was too strong. With 2 attacks demonstrated not to be successful, I leaped in to land a power punch onto the creature. This had proved to be a mistake. As I leaped into the spot to strike at my undead foe, he seemed startled by my behavior as I approached. With confidence, I struck the creature with my most powerful strike. I was not taking any chances with the creature. The punch struck the creature in the chest. He seemed not to be fazed by the attack. In fact, I do not think I caused any damage onto his body. Solomon Grundy moved his arm with a swift motion and backhanded my head with a clean motion. All that I remember is that my body had flown across the room and impacted a nearby wall. His strike was so powerful that the side of my body that had been hit had gone numb instantly. I used my power ring to heal my body. Based on that attack, I knew that he had a powerful attack, but I was able to heal myself from the blow. Then, Solomon Grundy launched himself in my direction. I used the power ring to create a force field around my body. This proved to be a futile action as his attack went through my force field as if it did not exist. His blow came crashing down on top of my shoulder blades and broke them instantly. The pain from the attack sent shockwaves of pain through my body. However, using my telepathy, I was able to use my healing factor again to heal my body from the vicious attack. Apparently, the creature was able to bypass my green power ring's abilities. However, I was still able to affect myself. During the combat, I was able to determine that the creature did not attack with any form of intelligence. He seemed to attack on instinct. I could use this to my advantage. If I could cause the creature to use up his energy, then I might be able to incapacitate him. However, as I was thinking to myself, Solomon struck me again with a vicious attack. I was able to dodge his powerful blows. I used a feint motion to get the creature to attack in one direction. When he had taken the bait, I pivoted my body and brought a sharp blow onto his shoulder blades. The attack did nothing to faze Solomon Grundy. Before I could move away from his body to a safer location in the room, Solomon Grundy dropped to one knee, turned his body, and then landed a swift uppercut onto my jaw. The blow wrecked my body and left me in a state of shock. The blow was so damaging that it shattered all my bones in one hit from Solomon Grundy. I was not unconscious, but my body seemed not to be able to do as my mind commanded. Solomon Grundy seized the opportunity to incapacitate me. As I was completely stunned by the uppercut, Solomon moved near my body and grabbed my arms. He ripped the ring from my hand. As I looked in horror, the brute creature destroyed the ring of power in his large hands. The exploding energy sent the creature flying back, but it did not hurt him. In that moment, Hippolyta leaped into the path of the creature. Using her great strength, she grabbed the creature and hurled him through an interior wall. Etta, get Alan back to the ship. He needs medical attention, she yelled. Etta did as she was commanded and ran towards my body to extract my body out of harm's way. Before I lost consciousness from the trauma, I saw Diana transform into her combat armor. She ran over to where Solomon Grundy laid and body slammed him through the ceiling of the building. The crowd of people screamed as the large creature came crashing through the dance floor of the club. Diana and Hippolyta came to my side. Hippolyta, Etta, Steve, get Alan to the ship for medical treatment. I will stabilize his body to keep him from slipping into shock. I will lure the creature out of the building and battle him on the street to minimize any casualties, Diana said. The three did as Diana had commanded and took my body to the safety of the ship.
Diana Prince's Journal Tuesday, December 14th.
Now here we come to the climax. We've got an hour to go. I'm going to take a break. I'll be right back. All right, here we go.
14th, 1943, 10 o'clock in the evening. The combat had begun with each of us in a standoff, Solomon Grundy on one side of the street and I, the Wonder Woman, on the other side of the street out in front of the Iceberg Club. In a cruel way, our...
Now here we have to remind the reader about what Athenata represents in the story. She is the tree of life in the story. That's her spirit. She's the spirit of life, tree of life, or the Holy Spirit in our story, and that's why she's so different than everybody. And Solomon Grundy is representative of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and this what we're always trying to demonstrate in our story is that neither is really more powerful than the other. They coexist. They're symbiotes in the story, and we play on this concept of symbiotic relationships in our story, and at the essence, that's what our burlesque story is really about: sexuality. And bisexual, we mean there are two people involved in a relationship at all times. And in this case, you have this guy who's been basically killed, left for dead, but he was resurrected by Selene Kyle, who attempted to resurrect him. And why she resurrects him in this story, which hasn't been revealed in the story, is she was feeling guilty later on. At the time that this happened, she was a 20-year-old girl. She didn't really know a lot about the world, and after 50 years of reflection, she kind of felt bad that this guy died and the other girl died, and they didn't really have anything to do with it. And so she went to try to resurrect these people and to right a wrong, and what she didn't understand was she was too young to do it. She wasn't... In our story, the immortals, every 100 years that they live, they grow in power, and she wasn't even 100 years old, and she attempted to try to resurrect this guy, and it ended up going horribly wrong. And even someone of Cersei or Kirky's level of sorcery, who's 3,500 years old, she wouldn't attempt to do this. It takes way more power than what Selene is realizing, and this creates this terrible situation for this guy. And it is through Athenata that he's restored to life. And but symbolically, that's what the two characters are representing. She's the tree of life, and he's the tree of knowledge, good and evil, which is the feminine and masculine symbols in our story.
Our battle tonight was a symbolic battle of the human spirit. Solomon Grundy was the product of the magical forces used to satisfy the psychological need of mortal man. He was without soul, or that part of the being that connected each of us to the four realms of existence: fire, air, water, and earth. He was a mindless undead corpse that was reanimated by a powerful dark magic. He was the symbol for the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the masculine spirit that inspired men to directly pursue their individual desire or work with others to create a force of human mass. I was the other symbol, the symbol of the feminine spiritual energy that formed the bonds of unity and harmony. My place in the universe.
Sounds like need some interference here. Let me see what's going on before we proceed. Sounds like Windows is doing something in the background. Let's take a peek. Nothing out of the ordinary there going on there. But, something's peeking there.
Was to be the symbol for the tree of life. My will was to inspire women to form relationships that would endure the test of time. My magic was universal and infinite. Only through discipline and skill was it possible to inspire others to learn, to grow, and to nurture. Now, the forces of a Titan nature had brought us two together to duel in personal combat. Goddess Athena had brought me here to redeem this mindless Hulk Solomon Grundy. Only through my will could Cyrus Gold be.
Let's give it a minute to catch up.
Be saved. Only through my love could he be restored. Ares had set Solomon Grundy's destiny in motion years ago, and now, our play would be brought together in a climactic battle between man and woman. Solomon was a feral animal. He possessed a brain with limited structures. He was raw feelings and a creature of instincts and schemes. My mind was a balanced Libra mind. It was balanced between intuition and intelligence. The union of the two created wisdom. In a way, Solomon was the embodiment of war itself, that raw form of nature, that was untamed by boundaries. The Wonder Woman was the embodiment of...
Looking at the suit that was cut there for Adrian, whoever built that corset and did a really great job. Look at the wire work on that. It's just amazing. Whoever designed that suit did, I mean, it's incredible work. Detail work on that. Wow. Looks good. And the colors are nice and bright and clean too.
Of justice. Justice was the tamed war or domestication. Justice was controlled war. It did not seek a universe without war. Justice sought a universe of balance. The battle had begun gradually. I had managed to toss the beast into the street that was out in front of the club. His large mass had torn through the wall of the club and had pulverized the weak material structure of the wall. It would appear to me for now that my strength was superior to his strength. Knowing this gave me confidence. Our battle would be away from any innocent bystander. Hippolyta had managed to get the injured body of Green Lantern away to the ship for medical attention. The large mindless hulk of the man stood before me completely nude. In his animal state of mind, he was not aware of his nudity. His anger fueled his rage. This was clearly demonstrated by the monstrous cock that lay...
Now in this serial, one might be concerned that Solomon Grundy sort of parallels the Incredible Hulk, and DC might be sort of stealing this, but that's not true. Solomon Grundy was around before the Hulk. Predates it by, what, 50 years? 20 years at least. He was around in the 1940s, and the Hulk, I don't think, comes around until, what, the 60s? End of the 60s? And one could say that the Hulk is a homage to Solomon Grundy, the original Hulk. And from a historic point of view, comic book lore, I think in our lore, introducing him in the second book was a good thing to do. It's a very powerful DC character, and to link him with both Wonder Woman and Green Lantern, the character was kind of cool. I thought kind of cool.
Before my eyes, I would have to ignore that large phallic organ. In his passionate mind, we were just a male bear and female bear in heat. My powerful pheromones were what was driving his lust, whereas before, he was driven by Hippolyta's pheromones. Now mine had replaced them. His only desire was to make me his mate and kill anything that prevented...
Okay, so now what's happening in the story is Solomon Grundy is being controlled by other people. And he's basically a zombie, and he doesn't really think for himself. And he's going on pure instinct, meaning there's no real precognitive thought in his head. He's not imagining something and then acting. She, on the other hand, is a cognitive being. She's processing things in her mind, words, and she's just in the battle. So this is the basic essence of the difference between war and justice. She's representing justice, the tamed, organized, controlled warrior. He's representing the raw, feral animal, and who's untamed. And in this encounter, he ultimately wins the battle. And this battle presented, because we were writing from a sense of scale. Prior to writing the stories, we developed a system of scales, to get a sense of how powerful the characters were. And for her, in reality, she's way more powerful than he is. He's only a class 1 Titan in the story, which is 15 times class 4 Titan, actually. And he's at the highest end of what a metahuman would be, but he's under 100 years old. She's 2,800 years old, so her power is thousands of times more powerful than his. So to have her be defeated by him presented a lot of logistical problems for us as a story writer, because in reality he couldn't beat her, shouldn't beat her, she should win outright. But so we had to make it more a story about sexuality, in that she's a woman, he's a man, and they're really equal in nature, and they're both technically human, even though she's immortal, he's an undead being in the thing. So how would he defeat her? What would be the mechanism? And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if, in nature, no matter what an organism is in nature, there's always something in nature that is harmful to that organism. And in her case, she's this organism that can't die. But the thing that makes her who she is her mind, her control that she has over her mental being. And so for him to defeat her, he would have to create something that disrupted that. And since he's part plant, we went on the idea that maybe plants sort of adapt to their environment. And if attached to somewhat of a brain, it would learn to adapt to her. And so his body creates these, they're not really spores, but they're what I'll call male pheromones. But in reality, no one really knows what a pheromone is or what it does. There's no scientific evidence of that they even exist. People think they exist, and there's theories as to what they do. But from a scientific point of view, there's no real concrete evidence, nothing scientific about it. So that gave us an opportunity to create our own science. And so in this encounter, and we're able to set this up through the burlesque story, and this is why a story like this couldn't be told in a typical superhero type story, because they don't usually write from a sexual point of view. But in an adult story, we could do this, because with adults we could be more complex outright. It's very easy to explain to an adult that she's a female, he's a male. And he's part plant, she's not. And so his body adapts to her, and what ends up happening is she basically fools herself. And she ends up being put in a position where she's just trapped, and then he takes advantage of that. And how we equate that is he's basically a feral animal. He's just going on whatever a feral animal would do instinctively, and he's fighting instinctively. She's fighting somewhat instinctively, but mostly compassionately, because she's trying not to kill this guy, because she needs to save him, but she's trying to figure out how. And therein lies the problem that our heroine faces.
That from happening, in my compassionate mind, he was the villain who sought chaos into the realm of civilization, and I was the heroine who was sent to arrest him. My task now was to subdue Solomon Grundy. Initially, I did not know if this was possible. Solomon Grundy was protected by a powerful magic that protected his body, mind, and spirit, so My telepathy was not able to penetrate deep into his mind. However, my empathy could feel his mind. I could feel his anger, his rage, and his desire. I could sense that he was not of his own will or volition. My telepathy could sense that some other mind controlled his body. The protection spell was some other source independent of Circe's dark magic. My empathy told me that his protection spell was Amazon in origin. I could sense that the magic came from Hippolyta. Also, I could sense that the magic was not Circe's magic alone. There was another scent there. It smelled of Saline Kyle. She was the hidden sorcerer. She was the shadow. A less distinguished aroma. Light.
Now here's where we're revealing she's scanning his brain, and her truth vision and her empathy and her telepathy are telling her what's really going on here as she's spending more time with this guy. And she's realizing that the true culprit is Saline Kyle. He's being controlled by Saline Kyle, and she's the one coordinating the fight. And that is who animated this guy, and how where he's at today is because of her. And if you remember going back to Athena charged her with investigating him and investigating Saline Kyle. So our heroine is kind of conflicted at this moment.
As the magical fragrance was, it was the primary source of magic that animated Solomon Grundy from the dead. How this came to be would have to wait. Solomon Grundy leapt forward. He moved with a clumsy form. There was no formal technique or training in his combat skills. He was just a feral animal. His ferocity came from his raw passion that fueled his rage. I dodged his attack. I turned my body by pivoting on my left heel as his momentum surged his body past my body. As his inertia was focused in one direction, it took little force by my hand to move him forward. Using my left hand, I hit the back of his body with my hand. He fell forward and crashed into a group of cars in the street. Solomon Grundy regained his focus and charged at my body again. I waited for him to get within inches of my reach. I used my holographic wings that were tied to my mind to leap into the air gracefully. Again, he crashed into a nearby car. Because his body was a harder material than the car, his impact only served to destroy the car. As much as this was entertaining, this was not going to defeat Solomon Grundy. I could feel that he had great supplies of energy. I reasoned that if I could weaken his energy supply, then I could possibly subdue him by knocking.
Now she's reasoning is kind of what Green Lantern's reasoning was. She had to reduce his energy and then tire him out and then subdue him somehow, but at the same time she couldn't kill the guy. And so she had to outright, if she wanted to kill him, she could have just ended him right off the bat, but that's not what she was tasked with. Her task was to investigate that guy, and before she can do that, she has to subdue him somehow without killing him. And this sort of limits her, what she can do with him, where him on the other hand, he can just attack outright. And so her plan is sound. She has what she calls it's the secret athame is what she uses. And the athame has the ability to pierce people and wound people, and it can do both lethal and non-lethal combat, but she doesn't want to hurt the guy, so she decides not to use it. She has to stay hand to hand is what she reasoned with in the moment.
Him out with a blow to the back of the head, okay. Or I could use my laser sword to sever his head. But if I was going to save Cyrus Gold, then the laser sword option was not going to work. Even the most highly defensive animal must function within the realms of biology. However, to pull off this feat, I would have to get close to Solomon and subject my body to his physical attacks. Without knowing the extent to which his magic abilities extended, I could be placing myself in great peril. My existence was secondary. The goddess Athena had willed my body to be here to save Solomon Grundy. I would have to have faith in her wisdom. Solomon Grundy charged at me again. This time I let him make contact with me. I had a certain scientific curiosity about how strong Solomon was. I braced my body for impact. Solomon Grundy crashed into my body, but my spiritual mass proved greater than his. In my Amazon form, which is a...
Now here we're actually getting to see numbers. Some people would debate putting these kind of numbers, but because we created the scales charts for the characters, we can put these in terms of numbers, and I think the numbers help a reader to really get a sense of the scales going on here and proportions going on here, and in terms of the immortal versus the mortal or undead mortal here.
The Class 28 Titan, by immortal standards of physics, my spiritual mass was pounds. I calculated that Solomon Grundy's spiritual mass was around pounds. I was able to determine that this foul beast was a Class 4 meta-human. At that spiritual mass, Solomon Grundy was capable of pressing up 1,760,256 pounds of weight, or 881 tons. In my Amazon form, my spiritual mass more than Solomon's mass. I could press pounds of mass or tons. However, unlike other Amazons or other Titans, I had the ability to call upon the spirit which was infinite. Solomon Grundy had some ability to raise his energy supply for a short period of time. I could sense that his bioelectrical energy was being slowly resupplied by my infinite power supply. No doubt, this ability was tied to his plant-like organic metabolism. Just how much he could absorb from me and at what rate was still unknown.
And just telling the reader that her power supplies are infinite, his is finite. There's a limit to him. And her abilities are far superior to his. But he has the ability to absorb her energy just in proximity of each other. So because she has the greater power, his plant-like being is absorbing her energy and thus helping him to be stronger. And what that's doing is, like, she has the ability to will. Her powers are kind of like the Hulk's power, where she can adjust to whatever she wills. And there's no limit to her strength. And that's kind of what he's showing with his power, too. There's no limit to his strength because he can absorb the energy from the environment, the earth, Gaia. And so his environment is, he's using the earth to channel his power through, and he's just a conduit in that case. So in that sense they would be equal, and that sort of explains why Solomon Grundy is like Superman strong. It's because he's part plant and he's absorbing the environment around him, which is adding to his own power, his own mana in this case.
I would have to take a risk and find out just how much he could take, as I had any hope of subduing Solomon Grundy. I used my mind to increase my spiritual mass. My hope was to tire Solomon Grundy out. When he was tired out, I would strike. As I had calculated, Solomon Grundy tired his body out trying to lift my immortal body. As we rolled around performing one wrestling move after the other, he was finding it difficult to maintain his strength. He caught my body in a bear hug as we rolled around together. My abdominal muscles and labia rubbed up against his monstrous cock. I had to clear my mind to concentrate on the melee. I tensed my body up and used my strength to break his hold. The action pushed his mass away from my body. His large mass fell to the ground. He rolled his body onto his knees and hands. Now, his back was turned to me, and his neck laid out exposed to me. I rejoiced in my triumph. Now, I would defeat this inferior man. Justice would prevail this night. In my arrogance and in my stupidity, I leapt up into the air to land the finishing blow to the base of...
Now here's where she gets ahead of herself and she gets kind of excited, and it's part of her anxiety and she's not thinking straight and she makes an error and she underestimates him, and he uses his cunningness, which is tied to his instinct, and he's basically baiting her to strike, and when he does, he releases his pheromone attack here.
Solomon Grundy's neck. After a short fought melee this night, I would prove the superiority of womankind for all the world to see. As I approached the back of his neck, and as my confidence of victory over him began to chime chords of glory in my mind, my hubris was revealed as I learned that this mindless hulk of a man had baited me into his trap. He used his male cunningness to attack me at my most vulnerable moment. As I approached his back, Solomon Grundy turned his body and sprayed my face with a gaseous pheromone musk that emanated from his phallic organ. As with many mammals, Solomon marked my body as his territory. How quickly had my victory had been turned to defeat by my hubris. Now, I would pay the price for my pride. The masculine musk was a green cloud of gas that enveloped my body, mind, and spirit.
And so now when you're dealing with her, there's very few physical things that can harm her. There's only two things that she's weak, three things. Chocolate weakens her mental abilities. His pheromones do that. And then, an omega crystal tuned to her frequency will weaken her. But other than that, there's very few that will weaken her. So the only way to defeat her is through her mind, and that's what happens here. He sprays her with these pheromones, which are male pheromones, and just like her pheromones affect him, which they naturally are doing, and we've been talking about them through the whole book. Her pheromones, everybody's been responding to it. Now he's responding to it too, but since he's a wild animal, part plant, they sort of work against her in this sort of, her celestial being is actually working against her here, and he takes advantage of that. And for an animal, he's going to do what animals naturally do. He's going to mate with his conquered female here, and that's what's going on. And
the gas had the effect of sending my psychological state into instant sexual heat. My body came at once. My body fell to the ground unpleasantly. I flopped around on the ground, coughing and heaving and moaning embarrassingly for air. I panted for oxygen. The musk ignited a fire inside my sexual organ. Even for an immortal woman with a superior sexual drive, Solomon Grundy's musk caused my body to orgasm at once. My body shook wildly about as it convulsed from the intense sexual heat. The orgasm drowned my blue satin tights with my oversexed feminine pheromones. The release of my sexual fluids while my body was in heat caused Solomon Grundy to go in.
now what has happened to her is she's basically gone in heat, kind of like a cat. Her pheromones it happened like instantaneous. She went from like fairly okay combat driven to bam, she's in sexual heat, and by being that, her mind is now altered from this defensive sort of posture to a opened posture where she's more receptive to intercourse, and this sort of her body takes, her wild animal takes over, and her mental, her domestic being sort of takes a backseat. And this is what we've been describing in the last two books, where her and Edda were talking in chapter 1 about her animal instincts. And this is what has happened to her in this story. His pheromones have brought her animal instincts, the older parts of her brain, to the forebear, and so now she's all screwed up. She doesn't know what to do, and for him to mate with an immortal, he'd have to do that. Immortal women in the story can't mate unwillingly. They can't be raped in the story because they have to will it, because if they become unconscious, their body hardens up, and then it's almost impossible to have intercourse with them. But the only way to win an immortal woman over is to woo them, and that's what his pheromones did. Pheromone D.
Into a masculine psychological rage. His naked body displayed his sexual organ. His rage enlarged the monstrous cock before my eyes. He roared loudly like a...
We're going to mute this out, starting with here. And I'll be able to hear it. We want to avoid a TOS violation. Now, here's where the lasso is affected by his pheromones too, because remember, the lasso is a woman. And so she's going to have the same weaknesses as Diana. And what's happening here is their sexual lust has come through. And this is basically what has weakened them. And this plays into it, the plant-like nature of Solomon Grundy is what's overwhelming him, not the animal instinct. And it makes her open or susceptible to intercourse. And he takes advantage of that. And what ends up happening is his pheromone, because it's not a toxin, it makes her mind goes away, shuts her. Same thing that chocolate does to her. It shuts her mind down, and she just becomes this sex kitten. It's a mindless. What do they call it? Thrall. Okay, we can unmute it at this point.
In some cruel way, drove on his sexual attack. My empathic ability had become a curse to me, but a gift to Solomon. As both our bodies were indestructible and my energy supply unlimited, he could feed forever on my sexual energy. I had come to learn and to understand that Solomon Grundy had the ability to draw bioelectrical energy from my body. As he was not that old of an undead entity and partially immortal, he had not developed vast energy supplies as Hippolyta and I did. Our spiritual energy had taken thousands of years to develop. By human mortal standards, he was a class 4 meta-human. He had 12 times the attributes of anatomically modern human or AMH. In comparison, An immortal shifts energy states every
For some reason the computer can't say AMH, but when we add a voice actor in, they'll be able to say that.
100 years of their life by a power of 1, because I was 2,800 years old, while in my natural Amazon Titan form, I possessed the attributes. From that of a mortal human, I reasoned that Solomon had the ability to draw my spiritual energy to match me in combat. As our melee went on, I could feel him weakening. I had him beaten when he unleashed his pheromone attack onto me. Much like our Amazon physique gave off feminine pheromones to attract men, this masculine pheromone weakened women and made them ready for mating. My defeat was not from being faster, stronger, wiser, nor indestructible. My defeat came from basic animal psychology. Like a metaphorical slap to my face, Solomon Grundy had reminded me that man and woman were equal in nature. As superior as my body was, I was still a woman. He was a man. Nature had designed us.
Gonna mute this one part out. Oh, sorry. Tired. I don't really know. Just to be safe, we'll mute this part out. It's not vulgar, but I'm not sure if it would be a violation or not. But to be safe, we'll assume it is. Now, what's happening here is we're showing how he defeats her, and more important, the Nazis are observing this too.
Of ecstasy, my body, mind, and
Okay, we can unmute it there. We can just let it play out.
spirit had become the property of Solomon Grundy. As I looked up to my arms, the magical chains of bondage had bound my bracelets together. Only I could see the chains that had bound my bracelets. They were not the kind of chains that people...
Now here's where we differed in our mythology than with the more established lore. We're saying the only way that you can defeat an Amazon, this is tying her to her Amazon mortal being, is the Amazons were cursed by Hera and Aphrodite back when Hippolyta was queen, because she lied to Hera, and she violated Hera's law as queen of the Amazons. They were cursed for this, and even though Athenata was born after all this and didn't live in that time period, her mortal body is affected by this, and for it to not grow out of hand like it did basically in William Marston era, you'd had to weld her bracelets together, and in that they would lose their strength and become enslaved to men. And so we're going a step beyond that. We kind of removed that. You can bind her bracelets that do work, but she basically loses her strength, but she's still an immortal person. So, but what happens? We're modifying that, and we're saying the only way the Amazons can be conquered is if they're sodomized by a man or woman, be it the oral or anal. They're sodomized unwillingly. They become slaves to whoever sodomized that. And when they become sodomized or enslaved, the magical tethers is what binds their bracelets together, and they're technically married. Because Hera's law deals with the union of people, and they become enslaved to that person. And being enslaved to that person, they have to, well, they basically are like a genie at that point. Like a story of the genie, they're basically enslaved to whoever their master is. And in this case, it could be a man or a woman in the story. A lot of times it's more men than women. They can't be sodomized anally by a woman. It would be artificial, but they can be orally sodomized by a woman, which would affect them too. But to do that, the aggressive woman would have to force the Amazon to orally sodomization, unwillingly do it, which is really hard to do. The man, it's hard to do that, but it involves a lot of violence. In this case, he hit her with this pheromone, and she became in sexual heat. She didn't have a chance to, okay, I want to willingly do this. She didn't have an opportunity to do it. And so it in turn violates this law, and under Aphrodite law, she becomes bound to this guy. And because she's bound to this guy, the lasso's bound to this guy. And what we're further expanding on in the series is how we were going to relay it, because we have 4 goddesses that reside with the lasso. How would they be affected? And what I think I'm going to ultimately do, in this story it wasn't an issue because the goddesses were essentially knocked out. It's what we said in the story, but she was the one affected directly, and she's the one who controls the lasso. But the lasso has a mind of its own. So what we're going to say in future stories is that she's the one that the lasso is bound to. All the angels are bound to their lasso and girdle, and because that, if they're enslaved, then they have to fulfill whatever the wishes. They basically become a genie to the mortal. They have to obey the mortal. They're bound by marriage to that mortal, and so that doesn't go out of hand. what we're going to do in the lore is, if should they become enslaved to a person, there's so much time that has to go by, and if that doesn't happen, the Amazon has to find a way to escape, and several ways they can do that. Through Athena. Athena can rescue them if she wants to. The other goddesses can rescue them if necessary, and it leaves us several options in the future. But in this case, we're saying that what's happening is the magical tethers is how we change the lore a little. But this keeps in mind to William Marston's DISC theory of DISC, which is domination, inducement, subjugation, and compliance. By taking control of the lasso and the girdle, you then gain the control of the Amazon. You induce compliance in the Amazon, and they have to fulfill the wishes of their master, and so forth. However, because they're magical beings, they still have to apply by magical law, which a lot of mortals don't know. And one of the things that magical law prevents is using magic for personal gain. So when the men say they get control of the Amazon and try to use them for personal gain, which is they're using magic for personal gain, they and then invite a death onto themselves, which usually occurs through some demon will come and exact rage on them, which is the succubus form. Not succubus, the Amazons, we're saying their berserker mode is their banshee mode. When they turn into banshee, they go to their spirit form, and their spirit eventually kills the man or woman, whoever's enslaving them. If they use the Amazon for personal gain, then it will result in the death. They violated natural law at that point, which will result in the death of that individual, usually. It's the balance, law of balance. Okay.
People could see, I could move my arms freely about as if the fetters that linked my bracelets were not there, but they made me completely docile to my husband Solomon Grundy. My powers were his powers to command. By Aphrodite law, the sexual intercourse forced onto me by a man bound me to him by the laws of sacred marriage. My will was his will. The Wonder Woman was no more. My great strength was gone. It was suppressed by the magical bonds. In that moment, I became the property of Solomon Grundy. With my body denied its spiritual link to its spiritual energy, it weakened to that of a mortal woman. By law, my husband would be the instrument that would have to supply my body with its psychological need for sexual energy. I was now subjugated to a man. I was still immortal and could not die a mortal death, but my great powers were gone as long as my wrists were bound by the magical fetters. I passed out from the loss of energy. In that moment, the Wonder Woman had been defeated. War had won a victory this night. Man had proved to be superior. Diana.
Okay, so there our heroine is captured by our mindless zombie, and it's not looking good for her. That's where we're going to end it today. The review, we'll pick it up tomorrow. Let me write the time down. Got 5 minutes left. Today is the 16th of June. Uh, 16:56. And we stopped at 4 minutes and 26 4 hours and 26 minutes and 2 seconds. It's important to note that it's over a 6-hour story, so we still got about 2 hours left of story to go over. And this is where this is sort of the climax of the story, and where everything changes at this point. Our heroine's in great peril at this point, and she's clearly in a place she didn't intend to be. But how she gets out of it is pretty cool. Really by accident how she gets out. Okay, so we're gonna switch over to the intermission. We'll be back. There'll be a 30-second delay, and we'll be right back.